Mm. Yes, this is happening. We're here. Welcome. Yay! And I'm a funny boy, the Richard Hunt Biography. Author Jessica Max Stein. Yeah. And good friend Ted Kerr. Yay, I love an enthusiastic audience. My name is Greg Newton. I am the co-founder, along with my lovely partner, Donnie Jokum, of the Bureau of General Services here in Richmond. The Bureau is an all-volunteer queer bookstore, and we have been in existence since 2012, and we've been here at the center since 2014. Our regular business hours are Wednesdays through Sundays from 1 to 7 p.m. And then we often stay open late when we have events such as this. So, as I mentioned, we are an all-volunteer organization, which means we depend on donations, sales, and love to keep this boat afloat. I'm going to pass this around. If you're able to throw something in here, great. If not, no worries. And if you'd rather support us by buying books, that's an excellent idea. So I'll pass this around.
At Venmo as well?
Yes. You can also Venmo us, those of you online, at BGSQD. BGSQD. You can do it. And you will see my name on there, but it does go to the Bureau, not me personally. I can't figure out how to separate it. Just buy me marijuana. It's not easy. That's what Donnie's job is for. Before we get started, I wanted to read a land acknowledgement and a call for a ceasefire. So the Bureau acknowledges that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape. We encourage you to join the Bureau in signing up to make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community Houses Mannahatta Fund. The Mannahatta Fund, according to its website, is an invitation to all settlers and non-native people who wish to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide that comprise the history of New York City and the United States. And you can find out more at mannahattafund.org. We also want to recognize that today, March 13th, is the 159th day of Israel's genocidal campaign against the Palestinian people, funded by our tax dollars and enabled by our government's unwavering support. We hope that you will join us in calling for an immediate permanent ceasefire, an end to the siege, and an end to the occupation in order to stop the collective punishment of Palestinians and to ensure the swift delivery of much needed food, water, medicine, fuel, and medical aid to the people of Gaza. And on that note, tomorrow at 1 o'clock, we'll be hosting an open mic for Palestine, which will be a fundraiser for a variety of organizations. And that's it for me. So I'm turning it over to Ted and Max, and we're going to jump into Funny Boy. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Donnie. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Just so that the folks at home get a sense of how crowded this room is, can you all make some noise? Thank you. That was really beautiful. Hi, Max.
Hi, Ted.
How you doing?
I'm okay. If I look at you, am I talking into my mic? Yes.
Yes.
Pulling my mic out.
Yes. You know what? This audience is so lovely and real that they will say, we can't hear you, or something like that. Yeah. So we'll trust in the room.
Okay.
Happy Pub Day.
Thank you. Yeah, it's my book's birthday.
It's your So, Jessica Max Stein, this is your full name. And you are a writer, you are an educator. You have been working on this book for a while. You are also an editor and a writer at The Independent. You, well, formerly an editor, now a reporter. You teach at Hunter College. What else do we need to know before we jump in?
What else do we need to know? I mean, that's a pretty good list in terms of my career.
Can I read the last line of your bio from the zine?
I don't remember what it is, but you sure can.
Okay, it's really beautiful. It says, when not at her desk, she is generally out taking a walk.
Oh,
Younger.
Does that sound accurate?
I was afraid it was gonna be something about General Hospital.
Oh, I do. Oh, yeah, you're a General Hospital
I
aficionado.
am, Jason's back.
Okay.
Yay.
Oh, whoa, safe space. That's really great. So, I said I've been looking forward to this, and it's true, not just since we met a few months ago to talk about this, and not just since I knew you were publishing the book, but we actually met because of this book. So I've been looking forward to this book for 12 years. And one of the early times that we actually got to meet in person was, I think, in the lobby of this building. I was at Visual Aids and we did an event, and it was called We Fell in Love in a Hopeless Place, New Writings on HIV. And it was you, Ricky Tucker, and Chaplain Christopher Jones.
Yep.
And I'm very excited. So we made a little agenda for today. Do you remember what's next?
I read the afterword.
Okay, let's give it up for Max, who's gonna read the afterword.
So the afterword answers the two questions that I most often get about the book. How did I come up with the idea of writing it, and what's up with the title? So this book began, as well it should have, as a labor of love. And the afterword is also full of like Jerry Jewel-worthy kind of Muppety puns. And we have somebody outside who's like looking upset about wanting to go inside, and now they're walking away. So, okay. This book began, as well it should have, as a labor of love. When I was a kid in the 1980s in America's Rust Belt suburbia, the Muppets were everywhere. Television, movies, books, records, toys. You could say they were part of the very fabric of my life. Actually, you could say that. I slept on Kermit print sheets. That's the first one. I rediscovered the Muppets about 20 years later. I was living in Brooklyn, trying to find my footing as an independent adult. Once or twice a week, my next door neighbor Effie and I would eat dinner together, watch the Muppet Show, and laugh our heads off. In a frightening, unpredictable world, the Muppets were one of life's reliable joys. I adored the dynamic of affectionate anarchy, that's Frank Oz's phrase, among the characters. They treated each other with genuine good feeling, even as they blew each other up. But now, unlike as a child, I noticed the vast amounts of effort and illusion that went into bringing these puppets so vividly to life. Who was behind this? I had heard of Jim Henson, but now I paid attention to the different voices and puppeteering styles, the unique characteristics each performer brought to the job. One performer in particular grabbed my attention, Richard Hunt. He played most of my favorite characters, a broad range of personalities from young, eager Scooter to old, jaded Statler, groovy, laid-back Janice to squeaking, freaked-out Beaker, huge, gruff Sweetums to an early version of queenly Miss Piggy, and so many more. Yeah, various as they were, his characters had a certain sensibility, his own individual stamp. When I found out that Hunt was only 40 when he died in 1992, I assumed it was a typo. Everyone knows you can't believe everything you read on the internet. Not only had he been the secret weapon of the Muppet Show, he had worked on Sesame Street, Fraggle Rock, 3 major Muppet movies, a handful of short-lived shows, countless specials, and even a couple of non-Muppet films. No way had he crammed all that into 40 years. But it was true. Hunt died at 40 in the AIDS epidemic, predeceased by many friends as well as the love of his life. Yet day after day, in the face of grief and tragedy, Hunt showed up to work and was reliably funny. Was he just that talented, that driven, that resilient, or what? Yes, yes, and yes. I caught a glimpse of Hunt in Charles Kaiser's dishy history, The Gay Metropolis. And so this is a quote from a lover of his, Charles Gibson, a Sesame Street production assistant. What I remember is Richard calling me in the wee hours of the morning, inviting himself down with a quart of orange juice and pot, recalled on again, off again lover Charles Gibson. We'd get high and we'd drink our orange juice and we'd go to bed.
Charles Nixon is listening to you right now. He's tuned in.
Did you find him?
I did.
Oh my God. We didn't find him,
I
remember?
know. Well, I found it later. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad he's okay. We'd get high and we'd drink our orange juice and we'd go to bed. I sure hadn't seen that side of him on Sesame Street. Or had I? I loved the detail of the orange juice, like a kid on a happy sugar buzz. Who was this playful, exuberant character? Now I couldn't see the Muppets without wondering what I wasn't seeing. How were Hunt's characters so iconic, yet his character so invisible? Who was this guy? I guess you could say I was on a hunt. I was fascinated by the way Hunt's life brought together two worlds which are seen as separate and in fact deliberately kept apart. Puppetry is ghettoized as being only for children, a disservice to a brilliant all ages art form, and queer topics are thought of as strictly for adults. Hunt's life explodes these boundaries. I was shocked to realize that the era of peak Muppets was also the era of peak AIDS, though we think of these phenomena as completely disconnected. My Generation X heart was hooked. As I uncovered Hunt's story, I was touched by how he came to terms with his sexuality over the course of his life. Hunt's experience reflects similar journeys taken by other members of his generation and the country as a whole, as one's life often reflects one's times. Hunt graduated high school in 1969, the same year as the Stonewall riots, considered the beginning of America's LGBTQ+ rights movement. At first, he didn't identify with the gay community, which was just beginning to cohere. He and lover Duncan Kenworthy quarreled over being out, with Hunt wanting to hide their relationship. But even as he became more open, he didn't like terms like gay or queer. When he talked about his sexuality, he'd call himself a funny boy. He didn't let his sexuality define him, and he didn't let other people define it for him. Characteristically, he defined it for himself as a joke. In that sense, funny boy is the perfect term for Hunt. Funny is his livelihood, his stock in trade, his trickster spirit, his most disarming weapon. Funny is larger than life, outsized, loud, and free. Funny gets away with pushing the line, making them think, because it also makes them laugh. Funny enjoys itself, even when life is rough. This terminology is classic Hunt. If anyone's going to make fun of this, it's me. And Boy reminds us that Hunt died at 40, costing him decades of promise from a preventable epidemic exacerbated by prejudice. Boy is not to imply he was anything less than a man. In many ways, he grew up early as the oldest brother of 5 siblings, and as a performer at such a young age, already aware of his vocation. But there was a Peter Pan youthful playfulness to him, even in his most despairing moments, that he likely would have retained even as a senior citizen. Given Hunt's outsized, fearless personality, it seems fitting that writing his biography often shoved me out of my comfort zone. I spoke with nearly 100 of Hunt's family members, lovers, colleagues, friends, and classmates, each of them giving me a little piece of his larger story. I traveled to nearly all of Hunt's beloved places, interviewing people all around Manhattan, New Jersey, Martha's Vineyard, Truro, and Toronto, even taking my first trip overseas to research the book. I fought over a lot of restaurant checks. He never let anybody pay a check. Mark Hamill's dog Mabel fell asleep on my lap. I made Frank Oz laugh. And as I worked on this book, I found Hunt's personality rubbing off on me. Instead of being wary of people, I was curious to get to know them. Instead of hiding at home with a book or an episode of The Muppet Show, this hermit started going out. Lo and behold, I fell in love with a woman who lived in New Jersey, just 6 miles over from Hunt's old hometown of Closter. Reader, I married her. Following your heart is risky. Life can be scary, but you only get the one, as far as we know, so make the most of it. Enjoy the adventure. If I learned anything from writing this book from Richard Hunt, that's it.
Oh, Max, that afterword is so beautiful and it encapsulates so many of the best qualities of the book. It's clearly well written by someone who actually cares about sentences and word choice and paragraphs. But also it's so full of information that's both personal yet factual. You know what I mean? You get a sense of Richard as a person, but you also get a sense of the times that he lived, and especially in the afterward, you get a sense of the times that you're living in, right? History is always being negotiated with the times in which we're receiving it.
Yeah.
It's just so beautiful. And I'm curious, the last line kind of begs this question, but what did you learn from writing this book? What are some of the things that you now carry with you as the book starts to circulate beyond you?
You know, we came up with all sorts of answers to this question, and they've all just flown out of my head.
Dear reader, she had time.
Well, some of it is what I said in the afterword about being curious about people instead of being afraid of them, and kind of in taking him into my heart in that way. But I also learned a lot from the process of the book, because it was very relational.
Mm.
We were talking about like getting people to an event, and then we were talking about, well, my wife and I were talking about this in terms of activism. It's like it's all relational. Like it's all about the connections that you make. And I found that with this book too, because when I first started, especially because I also learned a lot about puppetry through writing the book.
Yeah.
But when I first started, like, hey, I want to write this book about Richard Hunt, and all these puppeteers are like, well, are you a puppeteer? No. Oh, you're not gonna understand. And then I knew I had turned a corner when it became a pet peeve, because oh, what are you writing? Oh, it's he was a puppeteer with the Muppets. Oh, he did the voices. I didn't do the voices. It's not a radio program. Like do you watch the Muppet Show with your eyes closed? Like, and so when that started driving me nuts, I was like, oh, okay, I've clearly I feel like I understand more about puppetry now.
And you give that gift to the readers. Obviously, one of the things that drew me to the book was I knew you wrote it, but also I care about HIV/AIDS a lot. So I was interested in that part of the book. But what it did for me is it did teach me a lot about puppetry. Do you mind if I read a passage that elucidates that a bit?
Yeah, while you find that passage, because that's what I love about the book is it gets both of those people in the same room, and they wouldn't necessarily be in the same room.
Yeah, and well, you say it so beautifully in the afterword, right? Peak Muppets and peak AIDS are happening at the same time, right? And Muppets is still around, HIV is still around. So it's also really important to be keeping on looking, if we're going to look at the present, to be looking at the past in order to look at the future. And you do that so well. So is it weird that I'm going to read your words to us?
No, but
Okay.
can I finish? Like,
Yeah.
just in terms of it being, well, no, because just in terms of it being relational, there were a few people in the very beginning, Richard Hunt's mother, and then the puppeteer Jerry Nelson, who immediately were like, this book needs to happen. I'm going to tell you all kinds of crazy stories. This is great. And then I had like a good 6 months at least where I walked around just being like, oh, I wish somebody would write this book. I really want to read this book. And then finally one of my friends was like, that's you. That's you. And I was like, oh, damn.
Wait, so back up, you were doing interviews, but not sure you were going to write the book yet?
Yeah, I was just kind of collecting information. I was just kind of doing oral histories, just kind of seeing what was there. And I really had to kind of earn trust and kind of go up the tiers of trust, and so, these people vouch for you with these people, who vouch for you with these people. And it was very, very relational.
And what did that do for you? So you were building trust with these people, but how did that correlate to you trusting yourself, maybe?
Yeah, well, and just realizing how important these connections are. And I don't mean connections in terms of ins. I mean connections in terms of hey, let's talk about why I care about your friend, why I care about your colleague, why I want to tell the story, in a respectful way.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel that was always understood? Did you ever feel like they were suspicious of you or anything like this?
In the very beginning, oh yeah. I'm like, I want to talk about him having AIDS, and you don't even know anything about puppetry, and there's also kind of a generational divide about that a little bit. So there was a little pushback in the beginning, but I just charmed my way through it. God bless. I don't know.
So one question I do have actually that's coming to me now is what ethics did you create along the way for yourself, whether it's about making sure that you adhere to this trust, but even I'm curious, like, what promises do you make promises to Richard? Do you make promises to the dead when you write about the dead?
I definitely made myself a promise to write a book that he would be proud of. And to not have anything in there where I would imagine him being like, oh, don't put that in there, don't need to know that, don't say that, you know. But then also in terms of ethics, I also did a lot of things that a lot of biographers don't do. You know, I offered for people to read sections. I sent people sections. You know, they didn't always want to, you know, they didn't always read them. Because I do think that's hard. One of his friends, Louise Gold, who was another performer on the Muppet Show, she said she never reads anything about those times. She hasn't read the Henson biography. She says, you know, I was there, I lived it, I remember it, and I don't want to experience someone else's version of it. So some people didn't want, but you know, in the biography community, like, you do not do that. Friends, the family, like, they do not read what you write. This is you do what you want, but I want it to be accurate. Like, this is the weird line of being a biographer, because I also got a lot of like, oh, did you know him? Were you there? Like, no, that's not about, you know, like, not being there gives you a certain like ostensible objectivity, but then at the same time, like, you weren't there, so like, I kind of totally get that, actually. Like, you weren't there, so like, who the F are you? Like, you weren't there. Like, what do you know? Like, well, okay, but you know. But then it's funny because like some of those same people, they'd be like, oh, well, here's this, you know, this movie that we did in 1983. 1984. So it's fascinating because like you weren't there, and that's a good thing in some ways, but you also like, I'm also totally fine with like, you're right, I wasn't, so like, how is this? Oh, well, maybe it was a little more like that, like, thank you. And I think a lot of biographers like that, that's a no-no. Like, no, this is my book, you don't get to, you know. So I was like very, very transparent about that in a way that a lot of biographers just aren't.
What I love about that story is that is true, and yet in 2016 you won an award from the Biographers Association because of the book proposal that you did for this book. And so it's interesting to maybe live during so much change too, right? Like, maybe this is changing in the world of biography. Are you finding that did you make friends with other biographers? Do you feel like you're part of a new generation that maybe doesn't adhere to the same rules as previous generations?
I wish I could say yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's happening. I haven't been part of a lot of those discussions.
Yeah. One thing that you said that I found really interesting just now is that you wanted to make, well, I can't remember the words exactly, so you should remind me. I asked you about Richard, and you wanted to make a book that he would be proud of.
Yeah.
And then, so that begs the question, like, how did you feel when you were writing stuff about him that maybe he would not like to see, or that maybe was seemingly unflattering? How did you negotiate that and your promise to him?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question too, because, you know, too much in one direction and it's a hagiography, and too much in the other direction and you're kind of an asshole. But I also find it fascinating, like, speaking of the Biographers Organization, like, I find it fascinating that some people want to write books about people that, I mean, maybe they have different relationships with them, but like the example that I'm thinking of is there was a panel at the Biographers Organization conference a couple years ago of biographers who were all writing about Richard Nixon. And like, why would you want, like, like, he's like, are you saving him from obscurity? Like, you know, it's like, maybe I'm like a little more of a people's historian to like not be excited by that at all. Like, but anyway, so the other side of writing a hagiography is like, if you really hate somebody, like, why are you writing this? Like, you know. So, I mean, there were moments where, yeah, I mean, certainly there's things in there where like, maybe he's like, you know, but I think overall, like, when you contextualize it, like, there isn't anything. I mean, it's funny because that's a great question. And I feel like I mean, you know, hagiography is like the the kiss, it's everybody, it's autobiography is like terror,
Mhm.
you know, but there isn't really anything in there that like, I think he'd be like, oh my God, you know, so.
I mean, that is one of the hard things about death, right? Is that we don't know. He doesn't know, right? And all we have is other people's responses and your own ethics and the promise that you made to yourself. I know for myself, it doesn't matter, right? Like I'm gonna write. Let me start again. What it's important to remember about this book is that it is coming from an academic press. You did tons of research, you did tons of primary source interviews, right? And so the gift that you're giving is not a mirror of him, it's not a portrait of him, it's a biography. And so that means that you did your work, so you're giving him witness, but you're also giving him analysis, which I think is really a generous thing to do. And in that process, you said you learned some things, and I said I learned some things. I'm curious, what do you hope that a random reader will learn?
I really love that question because one of the highest compliments that I've gotten on the book so far is from Larry Merkin, the producer of Fraggle Rock. And he said, well, first of all, he said like, oh, at times, like I had to remind myself that you didn't know him. But he also said like, you did a really good job, like interpreting the facts, like when there were things that you weren't sure about and just being like, here's like, I'm connecting these dots like this, but like being transparent about that. And like, maybe you could look at that like this. I was just thinking about that. I'm reading, there's a new, you've got a billion copies back there, the new Brad Gooch biography of Keith Haring. And there's a moment in there where when he leaves Pittsburgh and comes to New York, oh, it's right up there, yeah. When he leaves Pittsburgh and he comes to New York, he said in an interview, and again, like you can't interview a dead guy.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, my girlfriend was pregnant and like I had to like, you know, either like leave Pittsburgh or become a father. And Gooch interviewed the girlfriend and she was like, I was never pregnant. Like I would tell you if I was. And he just puts them like next to each other.
Yeah.
Like, you know, Susie denies these claims. And then like, and you kind of see him like just going, yeah. There's definitely moments like that in here. Don't ask me what they are because I just drew a blank after that
Sure.
sentence came out of my mouth. But there's moments like that.
Well, then let's back up a bit because I realized I've read the book. I think you're familiar with the book. Yeah, there might be folks who haven't had a chance to read it, so give them a sense of who is Richard Hunt? Why should they care about this funny boy? Beyond his CV lines, but like what's a anecdote or a little flavor of him?
CV.
Like a line on his CV or his resume.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
I just made that up.
Well, I did want to kind of protest, or not protest, but like jump in when you're like, this is a scholarly book and you did lots of interviews and you like nailed down a lot of facts, but like just to speak sort of in defense of narrative nonfiction, because like hopefully, as I have been told, like when you read it, it doesn't feel that way. I'm a little defensive about this, I think, because I also get this a lot from my students.
Yeah.
Like, oh, nonfiction, oh, it's so boring. Like, no, like, hello, we can do all the same stuff you can do. Like, you know, we just actually do it accurately. You know? You know, like we have characters, we have plot. Like I was just ranting about this in our fiction unit the other day because like I'm so jealous of fiction writers. Like, oh, like how did this person feel in this moment? Well, he didn't tell anybody and nobody wrote it down. So like we don't know. But like, oh, fiction writer, oh, he was sad. Like, oh, like I'm fun. Like I'm so jealous.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So like I do hope that, you know, so part of why they should read the book even before like how hilarious Richard is that like they should, you know, it reads, I'm told it reads like a novel. But also like I mean, you heard some of this in the afterword, is like he was just hilarious. Like he was always on, he was always funny. Like you're in the car, like, even in high school, like you're in the car with him driving around and he just starts like imitating like a radio soap opera and he's doing like 5 different voices and like dun dun dun, you know, like doing all the music. And he was really generous. If you went out to dinner with him, you could never pay. Even if you tried to go to the restaurant the day before and like he would just find a way, he would just always pay. And he would just say, like, when you make more money than me, like then you can pay, but he just never, like he would literally like be like, somebody told a story at his memorial service, just literally on the floor wrestling over the check. You know? And he just, cause he grew up, you know, kind of hand to mouth and like, not hand to mouth, that's a terrible way to say it, but like, you know, a big family in a little house. And he never really forgot that. And so like, what I love about the book is like, he like saw everybody in a way that I find to be really rare and to be really necessary. Like he just, you know, even when he was doing the Muppet Show, like there's this, he made friends with this couple in London. He was, this is such a true story. He was friends with the guy who ran the Japanese restaurant that he went to all the time. And that guy had to go to his father's funeral and he couldn't afford to shut down the restaurant for the night. So Richard was like, let me run the restaurant. Like, and so he's like being the host, he's like being a waiter, he's like terrible at it. Like everybody's like, where's my food? What's going on? You know, and there's this couple and they're out, and it was so cute because it was such a great interview because they remembered exactly when it was because they went out for her birthday after it was their first time like ever leaving the house, like since their kid was born, you know, because like, you know, you've got a kid. And like, so they were like, oh, and, you know, it was this day on this year, da, da, da. And then he just, and they stayed late and he like gave them all kinds of extra drinks. And the restaurant empties out and he's just like hanging out with them, like, oh yeah, like, and they had no idea. Like, cause he had this great, it was this kind of running gag with him because everybody knew his work and nobody knew him. So he was like, oh, like, cause they were like, oh, can you afford to like, you know, be comping us all these drinks? He was like, oh yeah, I work at the Muppet Show. And they still were just like, oh, like, you know, he just must like help out, like carrying stuff. Like they had no idea like how successful he was. And then he just became friends with them. And then one day they were like, why, like, we're just this like ordinary couple from this like, you know, small town. Like, why do you want to be friends with us? And he was like, I'm just really grateful for like nice people that treat me nice. You know, and he could have been hanging out. I mean, he was also hanging out with like, you know, the same time, like, hanging out with Cleo Lane, hanging out with Mark Hamill, like, and he's hanging out with this like random newlyweds in the restaurant, like, because he's just like, you know, all the cameramen knew him. Like he really saw people. And I just like, he's just great. Like he's hilarious.
Yeah.
And I also love the way that he kind of grew over the course of his life.
Yeah.
He was like a real spaz. And then he like kind of, I mean, he was always like, you know, I mean, even sort of like low level Richard Hunt is still like a kind of a spaz in anybody else's, you know, but I don't we use that word anymore, like an energetic person.
Zoom will let us know.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll look for comments.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Okay. But he like kind of found this peace that is just really beautiful to me.
Yeah, I mean, he's such a familiar person at first when you're writing about him as a young person. Like I think we all know, especially being in an LGBTQ bookstore, how annoying young gay men who want to be perfect can be. There can be this kind of like, I'm the best, see me, and I want to do well, right? Like, I think maybe have copies of The Velvet Rage here, like.
Oh, I don't think of him like that. I think of him in the early days just kind of like a golden retriever.
It's not just similar. They're the same thing. They're
Are you home? Are you
related.
home? Are you home? Is there kibble? Are you home? Oh my God, you're home.
Also, he wanted to achieve, right? Am
Yeah.
I remembering correctly? He wanted to be an actor. He thought highly of himself. He wanted other people to think highly of himself. And so that comes very clearly. And then what emerges too is his desire, would you say, for community, for family,
Yeah.
for people?
Yeah.
And when you're compiling these interviews and you're meeting these people, do you feel them also connecting to each other, or do you think that Richard's the center?
There's definitely both.
Mhm.
There's definitely overlap. And there is a lot. He was like a big, Ethan told me he had to leave early. He's not offended by it.
Yes. He's
Like,
a
"Don't
spaz."
freak out." He's kind of high energy kind of vibe.
Yeah, we're taking a water break.
Excellent. No, so in some ways, the groups overlapped. But then in other ways, he was a huge compartmentalizer, and that was fascinating, because you have like some angles of his, like some kind of circles of his life that didn't touch.
Mhm.
And so that was fascinating.
Yeah, so we get a sense that he was this, what was that great line? You have to remember the line you said. There was a big family in a small house,
Yeah.
and then he's emerging into a young adulthood. He wants to be a big guy. He starts to work, and he starts with Jim Henson Productions, right?
Yeah.
And he's finding his way, but it's not an easy fit right away. Is that correct? Like he has a little bit of growth, like he has to kind of, he's so young, right?
But they all did. They all had an apprentice period.
Mm.
Yeah.
And as I was reading the book, of course, I respect artists, right? But to return to an earlier point, you really understand the amount of physical work, the amount of
Yeah.
intellectual work, and the amount of teamwork that you have to do, right? Some of the scenes in which you describe what it means to be being a puppeteer with other puppeteers means you have to be comfortable with your body, and you certainly have to be comfortable with other people's bodies. And I'm wondering, obviously, through your research period, you learned a lot about puppeteering and the Muppets, but I'm wondering if you were stuck in an elevator and someone said, give me one Muppet fact, what would it be?
Oh, wow. I mean, probably just the thing, like, they don't just do voices, like, please stop saying that they just do voices. Like, you know, you don't watch TV with your eyes closed, like, it's not the 1950s, like, it's not the radio,
Mhm.
you know?
And did you start to watch, let's say, Muppets Take Manhattan? Did you start to watch that movie differently, or what did you watch Sesame Street differently as you were learning more?
Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff that I had to like poll people about, like, how did they do that? Like his character on Saturday Night Live, they did the first season of Saturday Night Live, and his character smokes. And I was like, internet, how does this character smoke? And like, you know, internet meaning like my sort of puppet, you know, internet community, and people, you know.
Like a Reddit, just for Muppets?
People
Okay.
that I know.
Okay, your cabal of Muppet.
Through a straw.
That's how
So
the,
he is smoking, and then there's just a straw up through the puppet. The puppet's literally smoking.
okay, that's what you have to tell people in the elevator. That's really good. That's so cool.
Yeah.
I remember the first time, it was either at the reading here, or maybe it was something around this beautiful zine that you made, is you really also highlighted how, I think it was Sesame Street at the times, you can actually, we think of Sesame Street as this, you know, apolitical, just for children, you know, some people could get that sense, but actually it is, because it's an art form, it's an art form that is reflecting its time. And I remember you did a close read of the telephone,
The party line.
the party line.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, you can share that story, or any story that kind of made you realize, oh, actually, the people powering those Muppets and those puppets were having life beyond me as a little kid viewer, you as a little kid viewer. Is anything coming up? Do you want to tell the party line or a different story?
So you're asking me this question with somebody from Sesame Street in the front row.
Well,
Because it's changed a lot over the years.
sure, yeah.
You know, and I think it has. I just don't want to get jumped on for saying this, but like it is a little more worried about politics and about, you know, just focusing on education than, and I mean, I've had Sesame people kind of complain about this to me. Like there was a scene, they did a scene, I don't remember if they were on an airplane or if they were in a restaurant, but like the Muppets were waiting on the humans, and they did a couple different takes, and then they got it right. And then they got a note like from the education department that was like, you have to switch some of this out because it seems like the Muppets are just like, you know, like are being seen as like treated like an inferior class of the humans. And so you have to like reshoot this whole freaking thing, like, and like switch out like some of the people and the Muppets to like, and people were like, you know, on the show were like, why, like, this is ridiculous. Like, you're just trying to check your boxes here. Like,
Yeah.
so it's changed, I think, over the years.
What seems to me the nugget of that story, what I remember though, is that Richard and his collaborators found a way to put the truth of what was happening into the scene, right? There was a kind of, and you didn't notice it as a kid, but you remembered watching it. I didn't notice it as a kid, but I remember watching it. But when you look back, you're like, oh, that is an adult dealing with loneliness, right? And so we can be watching the Muppets or Fraggle Rock or any of the other things and kind of remember that this was a show for anybody and everybody, right? Too often it just gets put in the kids section, but it's an art form that's for all ages, right? And so maybe another thing that we can talk about right now is how did you balance? You're talking about queerness, you're talking about HIV/AIDS, you're talking about what I would say premature death. How did you as a writer balance those intense subjects with Elmo, with the Muppets?
So that's what I love about this book is that it is all in there and it's not. I mean, I don't know if this is what you're like trying to ask, but like.
On the surface.
Don't look for
Straight
something.
shooting you.
Don't look for something. No, because I mean, like you're talking about a sketch where, I don't know if it's worth kind of explaining the sketch, but like it's called the party line, and there's like a line of payphones, and it's like it's cute. It's like a fake talk show, like about partying, and so people call in and like I love partying. Partying's great, and then like this other guy calls in, like, partying is terrible. The age of the party is over. Partying is, bad for you. And this is like 1989. Like, I mean, it's hard not to read the subtext in there, and then he's alone there and the phone doesn't ring. And he's like, well, maybe maybe he's right. Like maybe the age of the party is over. Like, I don't know, like, and then the phone rings again, and then it's like, hey, we're having a party, come on down. He's like, all right, I'll see you later. And, and he goes and he parties, and it's like, and and so that was by, Mark Saltzman, who later was actually like pilloried for saying that he had written a bunch of Bert and Ernie sketches that he based on him and his partner. And the internet was like, no, they're brothers, they're friends. That's a whole other can of worms, because then Sesame Workshop was like, oh, they don't exist below the waist. Okay, but like how many like heterosexual Muppets like have, okay, well, Bert and Ernie don't exist below the waist. Then like what are Oscar and Brangetta doing? Like nobody's sexualizing like this is nobody's sexualizing like this is what makes me angry about this. Like I'm so like, and I just I don't know, maybe this is like a controversial thing to say, but like I think about like I came out like really young, and like it was just about like I just knew like my community and I just knew my people, and like yeah, like part of that was about like who I thought was cute, but like it wasn't like like when I'm talking about like Bert and Ernie like feeling like they have a relationship, like I don't need to like like I don't need Ernie to be leaving anything in Bert's bed but cookie crumbs. Like I don't need to like I don't need to go there, and like and it's annoying to me that like oh well, if it's LGBTQ then it's about sex, but like oh but being straight is just like part, I mean it's that thing like oh like on the one hand like oh like you're groomers, and then like 10 seconds later it's like like, oh, here's my 3-year-old and your 3-year-old, and like they're gonna get married. Oh, but I'm a fucking groomer. Okay. So like why? Like I don't want it to be controversial, but like he was gay and he was on Sesame Street. Like I get this question a lot, and I kind of don't know how to answer it, because it's like
yeah, I don't think. I mean, respectfully, it doesn't have to be controversial. They can keep it. They can keep the controversy. You have a whole room full of people who don't find it controversial. It's actually only interesting. And then you write over 200 pages to prove that it's interesting. You know what I mean? And so actually, I'm not interested in the controversy. I'm interested in how did you do that as a person? We grew up at a time where actually, even in spaces like this, AIDS wasn't talked about, right? And then you started writing this book at a time where AIDS still wasn't being talked about, right? In my own book with Alex Yuhas, we talk about how, you know, we came of age at a time that we call the second silence, where, you know, AIDS was present for us, but there seemed to be this silent rule that you didn't ask elders what they went through. You assumed that nobody your age had HIV, and you certainly didn't want to talk about it with young people because it was depressing, or it was the past, or we had to move on. And people like you and me knew differently. People like other people in this room knew differently, and we pushed forward and we kept talking about it. But at the beginning of this book, that wasn't the truth, right? The beginning of processing this book, you had to fight to talk about HIV. You had to bring it up when nobody else was bringing it up. And it's not controversial to you. So I guess I'm just interested in, how did you do that? How did you just put one foot in front of the other every day for years to keep to your ethics and to keep to Richard's memory in such a powerful way?
I mean, I don't want to repeat myself, like, again, I just think it's like being relational,
Mhm.
like just like earning people's trust and really.
What about for you?
Really listening. to
I
them.
understand your process, but what about for you? What drove you to make a call to a person that you didn't know if they were going to be upset, sad, not call you back? Like, what drew you to every day go back to the page, or every day go back to the person who may not want to talk to you?
I mean, if you're a journalist, you know, you feel like a detective. I mean, it's fascinating,
Yeah.
you know, and you just kind of want to, you know, it's like putting together a puzzle without the box,
Oh,
you know, and it's like, oh, what does that section look like? Oh, I got to talk to this one. I got to talk to that one. It's fascinating.
what were some mysteries of Richard's life? What were some of those puzzles?
I mean, in the beginning, it was just like, how did he, like, you know, knowing that 'cause I found out pretty early on, a lot of people told me about losing his partner, losing the love of his life, losing a lot of friends. But again, like very compartmentalized, because
Mhm.
like there were some of his friends who didn't really know that part of his life at all. And then there were other friends who were like, oh yeah, you know, we lost this one, we lost that one, we lost this one, we lost that one. And then like, you know, I mean, and like you saw in the afterward, like I started the book, you know, like being pretty down sometimes. I'm like, you're, you know, you lose the love of your life, you're losing a lot of your friends, like, and your alarm goes off in the morning, like, not only do you like actually get out of bed and like shower and get dressed, like, you're a Muppet. How do you do that? And that question really drove me a lot.
Yeah, the thing that I really liked is, back to your point about how you didn't write I don't even know how to say that word, hagiography, is that you capture the dramatic side of him, right? And in a way that sometimes it seemed like maybe he had a low-key anger problem. Maybe not anger is the wrong word, but he definitely had passion, right? And he
Yeah.
wanted things to be done properly.
Yeah,
And that must have been exciting to hear those stories.
yeah, well, because if he didn't like you, you didn't know. Because if he didn't like you, he just was like, oh, hi, how are you? But if he loved you, then he like saw your potential. And so he was like kind of a dick to you. Like that's how you knew that he loved you. Is like, and especially like when he was a mentor, because he also, you know, he had his own apprenticeship, and then like very quickly he started like mentoring and raising up like that whole kind of 80s generation on Sesame Street and on Fraggle Rock, especially. And like kind of the better he thought you were, the harder he was on you. But it was fun. I mean, I heard a lot of like fun stories about that.
Yeah, his generosity in all spheres really comes through in your writing of him, right? He's obviously generous with money. You told a story about that. He's generous with his time, right? There's an anecdote where he calls Mark Hamill and he says, I'm 10 minutes away. I've got 15 minutes. And then you're telling this story right now about how he was also generous with his ability to see the future for people.
Yeah.
And that's quite exciting. You're an educator. I'm wondering, do you feel that Richard Hunt has kind of changed how you are in the classroom or how you are with younger writers?
I mean, he's made me a lot more fearless. And just a lot. Yeah. Well, please also as a teacher, like, you know, if the students are entertained, at least they'll be paying attention, and they're more likely to actually retain stuff,
Mhm.
you know, so there is a lot of entertainment to teaching.
Yeah. In organizing today, we talked about our approach to teaching and how it really is a lot of prep work. You really,
Yeah.
it is a performance.
But also, like, if I want them to remember something, like, I mean, I'm not ashamed, like, I'll tap dance, like, this is you on Friday. Like, oh, no, I'm shameless. Oh, yeah, no, Professor Stein, like, she just has no, like, she's a different persona, and like, she just doesn't get embarrassed. Like, her pants could fall down, and she just would be like, oh, whatever, sorry. You know, like, just shame, like, you just have to be shameless.
So let's talk about Richard's performances. If you had to describe him as a performance or as a performer or as an artist, what are some words you'd use to describe him on screen or his work on screen to
I
be
mean, he was
accurate?
mesmerizing just from the very beginning. I mean, even when he was in high school plays, like all of his friends would just say, like, you just never knew what he was going to do. And Sesame Street, like I said, Sesame Street has changed a lot, and they improvised a lot more in the early days. And so you just kind of never knew what he was going to do. And a lot of his most memorable lines are ad libs. At least according to Jerry Jewell, who I wish he was still alive. I would love to talk to him, and I couldn't get in touch with his wife. But like that, let me find it because I'm mixing up my lines here. But in the I'm mixing up my Muppet movies, but it's the scene where they're all talking, and then everybody gets quiet, and Janice says, "Look, mother, it's my life, okay." So she walks around naked. He totally made that up, and they just left it in. And there's like all kinds of moments like that. Like you just never knew what he was going to do.
I remember when I first started talking to you about this book, I always wanted him to be responsible for one character. I remember just getting frustrated that you couldn't just tell me like, what's his one quintessential character, right? And then by reading the book, I realized that, again, part of his generosity is that he was often passing characters on to younger people, but also part of his gift was understanding that a scene is made up of many different parts. And so he's often, giving you the filler that you need to focus on the star, or he understands that things are relational. Is there any, I'm going to open it up for questions, but is there any last words you want to say about Richard as a performer, Richard as a person, Richard as a generous person, Richard as anything?
I mean, I think a lot of the things we've talked about kind of connect with each other, because again, like the thing I really love about him is his like, he valued everybody. He was just fascinated by everybody. And you see all of that in his work. I mean, he says, Jerry Nelson says, like they all put little pieces of them into their characters. And so like you're saying like, oh, like what's the one character that he's like the most like, but because he is like connecting with so many people and so many different kinds of people, like he is, the young gopher, like he is the smart mouth in the balcony, like he is, oh my God, Beaker. And so it's all kind of all the piece.
Okay, so we're going to take some questions. We'll take a few and then we'll throw them to Max. So raise your hand if you have a question. Yes.
Thank you for writing this. I can't wait to read it. I loved his singing voice, especially when he played the shepherd in the Ramalama Ding Dong number on the show. So, did he do a lot of singing outside of the Muppets?
No, he had a really wonderful high school music teacher who like gave him kind of most of his training. And he said, like people often said to me, like, oh yeah, he had like, he had musical training. Like, no, he didn't have musical training. But he just was, really talented in that regard. Yeah.
Other questions?
You would say we were going to take like a bunch of questions.
I did, but then we had that first good question.
Yeah.
If he were alive today, is there something that you would want to ask him, something particular that you wanted to?
I'll repeat it for Zoom while you think.
Oh, okay.
If Richard was still alive today, is there something you'd like to ask of him? Is there something you'd like to know?
I mean, it's such an interesting question because if he were alive today, it almost seems obvious to say like he would have had a different life, because another thing that you and I talked about that we didn't talk about today is the way that he like really came to terms with his death. Like the chapter where he dies is called A Whole New Adventure, because he literally says in an interview just a few months before he dies, like, don't be afraid of it. You know, just believe and allow that anything is possible. It's like life after death. Maybe there is nothing, you know, you die and that's that might be, but why make yourself there? Why not take the excitement and the calm one gets from realizing, gee, maybe there's a whole new adventure. Wouldn't that be great? Yeah, so don't deny yourself that. And so like he did, and I think like going through like all the other, you know, the folks that died and the heartbreak of all of that, he had a certain kind of, I'm really choosing my words carefully, because it's really easy to like get, gross is the wrong word, like in talking about people who are dying or who have died, to just get, I don't know, just get kind of inauthentic about it. But he did like grow, and like, and acceptance is the wrong word, because like I'm sure he still was, you know, pissed, but like if he hadn't gone through that, I think he would, and he were still alive, like he would be a different person. And so it's kind of hard to imagine like what, I'm not saying it.
Well, I mean, the tragedy of premature death is that people don't get a chance to keep living. So they don't get a chance to be their worst selves, their best selves. They don't get a chance to see how the world will change them. And we don't know, right? Like, I'm not the person I would have been now if I died when I was 20, when I was 30.
Yeah.
So it's a generous and beautiful question. And that's one of the lessons of the ongoing AIDS crisis, is that people need not to die prematurely because of government inaction, right? Whether it's around COVID or HIV or police brutality, right? The thing I was thinking about from our notes that you said is that he lived well and he died well.
Yeah.
Right. And that doesn't mean that he accepted it. It doesn't mean he was cool with it. It means that one of the themes of the book, going back to that younger version of him that I picture, is that I can't remember his dad issues, but he had some slight dad issues, and he seemed to take on that role, whether it was in his family and thinking about the house and making sure that the house didn't get lost.
Yeah.
But also the mentorship was kind of like, you know, he was a Muppet daddy, right? And then, but he also seemed to take on that role for death too. He seemed to manage his death for other people too. That's something that comes across in the book to me. And so one can assume, to that beautiful question, what would he be, or what would you want to ask him now, is like, you know, how can we take care of you? What will make you, you know, drop your shoulders? Like, how can we care for you?
I love that. But I guess what it's trying to say is like, he came to a lot of acceptance, and if he hadn't died prematurely, would he still have some of that acceptance? So I'm kind of like, okay, so like you came to an acceptance that like puppetry was the medium in which you were a success, even though you had always wanted to be an actor. Like you came to accept that, but like, you know, if you lived for another 30 years, like, are you still pissed about that? You know, oh, like you had this one love of your life, like he didn't really treat you the way that you felt that you should be treated, or the way that I feel that he, you know, should have been treated. And like, are you okay with that? Like, did you know, did you find somebody? Like, I'm also, that's another thing that I sort of struggled with in terms of writing the book, is I had a lot of people tell me like he was looking for love. He wanted the love of his life. And I don't know, I mean, you know, I know I'm a dyke and I'm like pretty monogamous, and like I wasn't around in the 70s and the 80s, but like I don't think that needs to be incompatible with like having a good, you know, a good time. And I sometimes have people sort of presenting it to me as if it were. And that's the whole debate that I didn't really want to wade into. So I kind of wonder what that would be like for him if he were still alive as well.
Yeah, you would have loved polyamory.
I don't know.
The thing that I'm thinking about is, and I hadn't thought about that until this part, is an important thing that happens in the world of memoirs, especially after someone has died, is that we get a chance to know the person after they've died. What this last part of the conversation is biography. Thank you. Thank you, Richard. The thing that I'm remembering and the thing that I learn and keep on learning is that we live among multiple generations. And so as important as it is to make sure that people don't get lost to history after they've died, we have to make sure that we're talking to each other while we're all still alive, right? And so we can be having intergenerational conversations all the time, like we can have in this room when we wrap this up. And you had them throughout this book, right? And I'm wondering, maybe one of the beautiful many legacies that Richard leaves us with is the friendships that you formed. And so do you want to say anything about his community before we wrap up?
Just that they were wonderful, you know, I mean, I couldn't have, you know, again, like being jealous of the fiction writers who can just like be at their desk by themselves and just kind of make everything up. Like this book was very much a collective process. And I'm just really grateful to everybody who helped me with it and gave me their little piece of the puzzle.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, so talk to each other, buy a book, buy other books, and please, as Max said, it is a totally readable, enjoyable book. I read it in one plane ride and it's not that thin, right? So enjoy it and give Max a big round of applause. Yeah.